Hello, everybody. I'm Alec Farquhar from the Disability and Work Canada Steering Committee. I'm a white male, around 70 years old. I have glasses and a gray top. I'm so pleased to be with everyone today at the end of an exciting, important conference that we've had together. And we're finishing with a very, very important session that I'm hoping everyone will get a lot out of. We're very pleased to have with us the main leader of the labor movement in Canada, Bruske, who's president of the Canadian Labour Congress, and Perrin Beatty, president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So these are two vital leaders in our country who represent, I think, between them, millions and millions of people and organizations. And we thought it would be a great closing plenary for the conference if we could look at the opportunities for collaboration between employers and unions to make progress on the employment of persons with disabilities in Canadian workplaces. And by that, we mean not just employment, but employment that has a future, it has career advancement, and all the rewards that come with that. These two organizations have already collaborated to help Canada get through the COVID period. When Perrin stepped forward with Bruske's predecessor, Hassan Youssef, and it really opened the door for the kind of collaboration that has made Canada a real success story in the world. And today they'll be turning their minds to this issue that we're facing together, a complex, challenging issue, but one where we know we can make progress. So just a little bit of background on Perrin and B. Perrin has a distinguished political career in Canada. He was a member of Parliament for over 20 years. He served in numerous cabinet posts. He served as the head of the CBC, the head of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, and of course, currently he's president and chief executive officer of the 200,000 member Canadian Chamber of Commerce. That's a tremendous force in our society and in our economy. And Perrin also has a lot of international activities and is an officer of the Order of Canada. So we're dealing with somebody who's operated at the top levels of our economy and society and knows how to move issues. And Bruske has a similarly distinguished career in our labor movement in Canada. She's only the second woman to hold the position of president of the Canadian Labour Congress. She was elected in 2021. She's been in the labor movement as an activist for over 3 decades. She's especially served senior level roles in the United Food and Commercial Workers of Canada, coming out of Manitoba. And I can say that B has personal involvement and experience with the issue of employment of persons with disabilities that she'll speak to, and she's very committed on the issues. So between these two distinguished Canadians, I think we're going to see some chemistry today. And it's a very simple process. I'm not going to really be a moderator. Simply will get it started by giving the floor to Perrin for around 5 minutes to introduce key themes from an employer perspective. Then B will respond from a labor perspective, then back to Perrin, then back to B. And I'm sure that it'll interweave. We have a scheduling issue that may give us an extra 10 minutes, which might open the door for questions, but we're not really sure if that will play out. So more likely than not, the session will end at 2:50 p.m. Eastern, that is 10 to 3. It might go a little bit longer. So Perrin.
Alec, thank you very much. And for those of you, let me give my visual description. I sound like Alec's twin. I'm 72 as opposed to 70. What hair I have is white as opposed to any other color. But the difference between Alec and me is he has more on top and more on the chin than I do. I'm delighted to be able to be here with you today and to be with B as well. I thought in my initial remarks that if there's one theme that I want to leave with you, it is about the importance in a society like Canada of tapping into the skills of every single Canadian, of making sure that we aren't wasting skills, and that anyone who wants to help us build our country needs to have a place and needs to be called upon. And we need to do what we can, whether as employers or as governments or as citizens, to help to make that happen. And it is both a matter of human rights, and I'm sure that B will deal with that it's critical in a free and democratic society that every citizen has the opportunity to to be engaged to the greatest of his or her ability, and that we need to remove obstacles that are in the way, and we need to look at what sort of assistance we can provide to enable people to reach their full potential. It's a matter of human rights. But let me also look at it from an employer's point of view, which is more selfish. And that's, why is there a business case for this? Why is it important that we as employers recognize the need to tap into this vast the reservoir of skills that is out there that we should be taking advantage of? The Canadian Chamber this year created something called the Business Data Lab. And that's a partnership that we have with Stats Canada, and also where we purchase in data from commercial sources as well, to try to get a sense as to what is taking place in the Canadian economy on a moment-by-moment basis. One of the things that stands out more than anything else is that the latest survey that was done by our BDL of the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions clearly shows that businesses right across the country of every size, every sector, are struggling with labor challenges. It's a combination of a shortage of the labor force and recruitment and retention of skilled employees. The concerns are widespread. They're most acute in the same sectors that have struggled for some time: accommodation and food services, construction, healthcare, and retail, but it's across the board. Today, more than 1 in 5 Canadians live with a disability, and only about 3 in 5 find employment. Statistics Canada estimates that there are over 850,000 Canadians with disabilities who have the potential to work, but are not currently employed. And at the same time, we're experiencing unprecedented labor shortages that hit a record high of 1 million jobs unfilled earlier this year. And these numbers are simply too big to ignore. Periodically, I get together with my counterparts from other business organizations. So my counterpart from the Business Council on National Issues, from the Retail Council of Canada, from the Canadian Aboriginal Business Council, from Canadian manufacturers and exporters, and from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. One of the issues that came up at our last meeting was, how do we fill this gap? Are there measures that we can take that are faster than others in terms of trying to ensure that we have the skills available in our society to be able to meet this need that exists? We hear a great deal about immigration, but and immigration is an important part of the equation, but it's not an answer in itself. And it creates other issues that we've got to deal with, as we are actually bringing more people into Canada each year at the present time than we are having housing starts in our country. So the question comes about, where will we house people, or how will they find medical care, and so on. If we are looking for measures which are perhaps faster in many instances to implement, and which can be implemented without creating ancillary issues that we have to resolve as well, it is, how do we focus on people who are here in Canada today to increase their participation in the labor force and to increase their productivity? And there are any number of ways of doing that. Obviously, technology is one of them. Upskilling and reskilling people is another. Looking for ways and bringing people like seniors back into the workforce who are healthy and anxious to be involved, but who've been discouraged in the past from being part of the workforce, bring them back in. Indigenous Canadians. How do we better as well take advantage of the skills of people who've come in from other countries, but where we're underutilizing their skills? And what can we do in terms of tapping into the pool of talents that's there among Canadians with disabilities? Does this mean that employers need to invest in this? Yes, it does. Does it mean that we need to find accommodations to assist people? Yes, it does. But that's the nature of the economy that we're working in today. It's both the right thing to do, and increasingly it's the smart thing to do for businesses to be able to look at how to do this successfully. And it's important then that managers, that employers look at how they can be helpful in terms of easing people to achieve their full potential in the workforce, and to be able to make that contribution. We shouldn't kid ourselves, and certainly nobody on this call is under any illusions. There's still an enormous number of barriers faced by persons with disabilities. Not only do we have to improve the accessibility of our workplaces, but we need to address misconceptions and attitudinal barriers such as lack of awareness, bias, discrimination, and others that are still prevalent too often in our society. But the message that I would have for employers today is this, that we have here in Canada today a pool of talent that is available for us that we are underutilizing, that we are a rich society, but no society is so rich that it can afford to allow itself to waste the skills of people who want to be involved and want to help us build our society. So let me leave it there, and I look forward to engaging in the discussion, and perhaps I can hand it over to Bea.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction, Alec. And it's a pleasure to be here alongside Perrin and with all of you to really talk about this very important issue. I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length light brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a black shirt and a black and white patterned blazer today. And I do want to start by respectfully acknowledging that I'm joining today's session from Ottawa, which is the traditional and ancestral land of the Algonquin Nation, and that this land is unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. I'm grateful for the generation of peoples who have been custodians of this land for thousands of years. I really just want to start this important conversation off with focusing my remarks on union-led initiatives, and in particular, those advocated by and for workers with disabilities through our network of over 52 affiliated unions across Canada and the 3.3 million workers that they represent right across Canada. Really, at the heart of the trade union movement is the philosophy that's based on social justice, on the idea that every human being has the right to participate in all aspects of society. And the link between the labor movement and the disability rights movement is an obvious one to us. And therefore, I want to begin today by just giving you a very brief overview of the history of trade union activism on this issue to illustrate how we advocate, how we make gains at the bargaining table with employers when it comes to accessibility in the workplace and the rights of workers with disabilities. Historically, and up until the present day, unions continue and have played a very important role in advancing the disability rights in the world of work. We work to eliminate not just the physical barriers, but communication barriers, technology barriers, organizational barriers, and quite frankly, the attitudinal barriers that we see in many workplaces. And we know that all of those things limit workplace accessibility for workers. Unions negotiate with our employer partners for health benefits and supports for workers within their workplace and within their employment contract or within their collective agreement. All of those things are crucial to all workers, but they have an even greater impact on workers living with a disability. And that can range from, time off work to attend medical appointments, to greater health benefit coverage, or to various accommodations within the workplace. We push very hard to extend health-related benefits to all workers, whether they're unionized or not, by lobbying for universal pharmacare, for family support leaves, for investments in our healthcare and care support systems, as well as for paid sick leave benefits. And unions have negotiated or arbitrated where necessary the accommodation needs of individual workers. Accommodations we know are often very unique to the specific requirements of that individual worker, of their specific workplace situation, or their specific industry or sector, the type of work that they're doing. And unions have lobbied for investments and improvements in workers' compensation legislation, in short and long-term disability plans, and accessibility improvements to our workplace, our union spaces, and our public spaces. And thanks to the efforts of disability rights activists over the years, in the trade union movement, we know that that sector with higher unionization rates, they tend to have better rates of hiring and retention of workers with disabilities. Workers with disabilities have been more successfully employed in the federal public sector, for example, with a unionization rate of about 76% compared to the federally regulated private sector with a unionization rate of just 34%. And with this, many challenges remain to ensure that workers with disabilities are not just included, but that they are fully welcomed and accommodated in workplaces and in our labor movement, so that our movement can also benefit from the strengths and abilities and priorities set by these members. At a time when our country's economy is facing increasing challenges, as Perrin pointed out, and when the world is facing unprecedented climate and health-related risks, it is more important than ever that we take very meaningful steps to ensure that we are benefiting from the creativity and the strengths and passion and abilities of all individuals. And we know that everyone benefits when workplaces are accessible, but yet too many people living with a disability continue to be unemployed or underemployed, or face barriers to advancement at work because of stigma, discrimination, lack of access to accommodation, or other issues. And that's why trade unions work very hard to dismantle and challenge ableism in all of its forms as a key component of our social justice and solidarity agenda. And as well to strive to end injustices faced by workers with disabilities in our workplaces, our unions, and communities. And because labor rights and disability rights activists have long felt that this has been an important issue, we've been working very hard at making change in this area. And the history of the labor movement is really the fight for fairness for workers, and whatever that takes, whether it's in the form of wages, in terms of reasonable time off work, barrier-free workplaces, workplace safety and health and welfare, employment security, or harassment-free workplaces, wherein workers can find respect and dignity in their workplace. So I look forward to sharing more about this agenda with you as we go through the discussion today and having the back and forth. Thank you, Perrin. Back to you.
Great, thanks very much, B. One of the areas we've been asked to talk about is what are some of the potential key areas for progress and for collaboration. And let me perhaps set the scene for that. This is one of those instances where business and labor are on the same page, where they have the same interest. And that is, how do we ensure that we can fully tap into the potential that people have and allow employees everywhere to feel as if they're achieving full opportunity and full potential? How do we remove, not only how do we remove barriers, but how do we put a springboard underneath people to enable them to achieve their full potential? At the Chamber, a couple of things that we've done ourselves, just looking at our own activities, is ensuring that we had Rick Hansen certification of our facilities when we moved into our new office, to ensure that we remove barriers so that persons with disabilities would be able to participate fully. We also have put a premium on the question of mental health in the workplace. And that's been particularly important during COVID, where we saw that the impacts of stress and of isolation for so many Canadians was having a dramatic effect. We need to work together to try to address that. And so often, this is an unseen disability that people have to labor with, and where all of us have to do more as a consequence. At the Chamber, we've also been following with great interest the Accessible Canada Act, which came into effect in 2019. And it aims to realize a barrier-free Canada by 2040 by identifying, removing, and preventing barriers to accessibility. And this year, we welcome Minister Qualtrough's first ever disability inclusion plan. And some of you may have noticed yesterday an announcement that was made by Minister Qualtrough about the creation of the Disability Inclusion Business Council, where she has brought together senior business people from across the country and put them onto a council to make recommendations on what initiatives can be taken to break down barriers and to ensure greater inclusion of persons with disabilities. The co-chair of that is my colleague, Anita Huberman, who is the CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade in British Columbia. And we're delighted to have Anita there. She's somebody who's just full of energy and enthusiasm, and she will really be driving this ahead, both within our network and also with employers across the country. The second pillar of Canada's Disability Inclusion Plan is focused on employment. And this is the pillar where collaboration across government, private sector unions, and other social actors can accelerate inclusion of persons with disabilities in the economy. Now, according to the Disability Inclusion Plan, people with disabilities, as most of us, place significant importance on obtaining meaningful jobs that match their education, their skills, their career aspirations, and their interests. And we need to ensure that we're not only addressing unemployment, but underemployment as well. And this was a theme that we addressed as well. We need to make sure that we're creating opportunity for persons with disabilities to have access to skills training, to mentorship, and to advancement opportunities. So it is not simply a matter of giving people a chance to get in through the door. It's a matter of how do we fully use those skills? How do we allow them to achieve their full potential? And what sort of tools can we provide to assist them in doing so? Another area of crucial importance is ensuring that employers of all sizes and sectors have the resources that they need to become disability confident. and develop a culture of disability inclusion. For example, thinking differently about disability and having the knowledge and tools to successfully attract and recruit and retain people with disabilities. So there's a good deal of education that has to take place among employers themselves, and what we can do to try to assist them to be able to tap into to the skills and knowledge that are out there in the people who are anxious to make this contribution. So let me stop there and turn it back to Bea to talk about some of the ways in which we might collaborate.
Thanks for that, Perrin. And one of the things that at the CLC and what the labor movement has been very focused on is the issue of modernizing the Employment Equity Act in Canada. It, quite frankly, remains largely untouched since it was first introduced in the 1980s. And in particular, we've highlighted the need for the modernization of the Act that recognizes and addresses the unique barriers faced by people with disabilities in relation to their recruitment and retention in the labor market. We met with members of the Federal Employment Equity Review Task Force earlier this year, and we made many submissions with key recommendations to improve the effectiveness of the Act from the labor's perspective. The recommendations included suggestions on how employers could develop better strategies for hiring and for retention, and also the advancement of equity-seeking groups in their workplaces, as well as language in the Act that requires employers to divulge pay gaps affecting workers that can lead to discrimination against and abuse of members from equity-seeking groups, such as workers with disabilities. Finally, unions through collective bargaining, through the process of sitting down with their employers and negotiating collective agreements, have the ability to make sure that employers and unions both fulfill their commitments to employment equity and to remaining accountable. So when we utilize our bargaining powers, unions can negotiate excellent language on anti-discrimination and ensuring that the workplace has strong language, clear processes, mechanisms, procedures in place to address harassment and violence in the workplace, so that everyone, including managers and employees, have access to that training that specifically also addresses barriers to employment and to advancement. I'm really proud to be coming from a union that is a great example of doing this kind of work in collaboration with employers. Our UFCW local in Quebec, our local 500, is the shining star when it comes to some of this work, developing some of this work. That particular local, which represents many workers right across the province of Quebec, has bargained with their primary grocery retail employers a number of agreements that included not just pathways to hiring and retention of workers with disabilities, but making that a major priority. In these tripartite agreements that they've been able to navigate, it has involved funding of the Quebec provincial government, the employers who contribute to a training and trust fund, and the union who resources a very fulsome training center. That training center is compiled of mini classrooms and an actual mini grocery store, where individuals who are living with a disability may gain employment. So they're provided with an opportunity to gain additional skills training, to determine what additional skills they might need, and as well to gain the confidence to go to job interviews, to be hired by employers who are also wanting awesome employees. Once hired and trained, the employers place these workers in retail stores closest to their home, and they work with those individual workers to accommodate them with whatever the needs are and to provide any additional supports they may need. I'm so proud to say that that program has an 87% success rate. And the participants are not just gainfully employed, they're thrilled to be working in an environment that focuses on collaboration. The employer is happy because they have awesome new workers. And quite frankly, it's a win all the way around. And so those are the kinds of things that we absolutely need to scale up and replicate, not just in that industry, but in many other industries. So there are pathways, and we need to be creative in how we address those pathways. Another concrete way that unions have been working on this issue is to defend disability rights by making sure that union members understand that it's also our duty to accommodate. And that includes having advocates in the workplace, including union shop stewards that are working within that workplace, union representatives, negotiators, understand and ensuring that workers' rights are respected in the workplace. So for workers with disabilities, that means knowing that they have a right to be accommodated. And that applies to all workers, regardless of their unionization status or whether they're full-time, part-time, or whether they're working in a very temporary kind of situation. However, the obligation and the responsibility to accommodate is primarily on the employer, and all workers, including workers with disabilities, have legal rights and duties connected with that particular process of gaining that accommodation. And that means that employers also have to be aware. And even if that worker was successfully accommodated at one point early in their career, the duty to accommodate is an ongoing one, and that accommodation needs might change over time as something we have to be aware of. And this is particularly important to emphasize when we hear reports of more and more workers experiencing even things like long haul impacts of COVID, and now identifying as a worker with an episodic disability. We know that hard-won workplace accommodation rights are at risk when offices become virtual and when workers with disabilities are at greater risk of being laid off or having their jobs furloughed. And that's why we think that employers and quite frankly, all parties need to be more educated in workplace issues and on issues that impact disability rights and even beyond the duty to accommodate. And that means moving beyond the bare minimum for workers with disabilities to better understand the needs of all of the workers that can often be seen as not being a real disability when it's not a visual disability. So it's very important that we keep that in mind when we're looking at these issues. And I'll send it back to Perrin.
Thanks, Pete. Pete, can I ask you a question just based on
what you're
saying? You were mentioning the impact during COVID when we saw people moving to virtual offices and so on. What I was thinking what I was going to ask you before was, compared to 5 years ago, how from your perspective are we? Have we made significant progress in terms of removing barriers and involving people more? And I was actually going to cite what happened during COVID as a step forward, that the new technologies that allow us to meet virtually for people who have difficulty moving and coming into an office, for example, that these technologies make it easier in the same way as it makes it easier to provide medical services and so on for persons with disabilities or people in remote areas. And my sense is in two ways that we've seen significant progress in the last 5 years. The first is that there's a growing social awareness that we are wasting people's skills, and that we have too many barriers in the way, and that we aren't doing enough to facilitate people. And the other is that new technologies will allow us to do things that we've never been able to do before to tap into these skills. I'd be interested to get your perspective.
Thanks for that. And I agree with you, Perrin, that in many ways, the pandemic and all of us having to move to online opportunities using technology in a different way has sped up that use of technology and has sped up all of our skill building around those issues. And for some workers, from the types of workers that can work from home, I think there have been additional new opportunities that have come as a result of that. And we shouldn't negate that, because that is a positive benefit. But for many frontline entry-level positions, it has meant a decrease in the amount of jobs that were available to be able to step into the labor market, right? And that's been a big challenge. And I don't know that that challenge has gone away yet. I agree with you in the assessment that there is more awareness now that we have to be able to utilize everybody's skill and bringing way more people to the table that have not been focused on before. So I think that's an absolute silver lining, is that employers in the job market that we have right now, and where we're trying to find new workers, have to look outside the regular pool of just young people starting into the job market, to look at newcomers to Canada, to look at persons living with a disability, to look at older folks who might want to still continue working, but maybe not in the career that they've had for the last 30 or 40 years. And that's also a positive, but that also means a rethink of how we approach the entry of those folks into the workplace.
How would you address that? It's obviously a concern for us as well. We have to ensure that there's an ongoing influx of people coming into businesses. If there is a problem that's caused by technology here, how would you address that?
I think first and foremost, everything has to start with education. Every single thing has to start with, there is an opportunity here to navigate a challenge of bringing different folks to the table to actively have an employment status within this particular company or within this particular field. And that requires both unions and employers to come together to have those discussions and to bring workers along and governments along to the table to see how we can navigate those challenges. So it actually means that we have to have more tripartite kinds of conversations to problem solve together, because not either one of us can solve this on our own. Employers can't solve this necessarily on their own, nor can unions. And so we need to work together on these issues.
I endorse that 100%. And you and I have been talking about the unemployment insurance system and what can be done to have a more of a tripartite approach there. But it goes across the board. When we're dealing with an issue like skills in Canada, it's an unowned issue. The federal government can't pass a bill today that would solve our issues, nor could the provinces, nor could the educational institutions by themselves, nor could employers, nor could unions. This is an issue where we need to bring all the players to the table at the same time with a sense of common purpose, that we're not in opposition to one another, but we all want to achieve the same thing. And I just couldn't endorse that more fully.
And I think that also requires us to, first of all, be honest about taking an assessment of where we're at. Where are the gaps and where are the skill lags that we need to actually overcome? And then how do we resource that? How do we build that connectivity through training opportunities, through tripartite agreements in terms of training centers to actually fill those gaps so that we're not educating workers for jobs that aren't there, but also providing pathways for advancement for workers that might be in those entry-level jobs as well to be able to move up.
This is perhaps a discussion for another day, but one of the things that I think we need to look at in Canada very seriously is the future of work. And what are the tectonic plates that are moving here? How have things changed permanently as a result of new technologies such as video conferencing and remote work and other changes that have taken place? And how do we get in front of that? One of the things we've done badly in the past is to project what our skills needs are going to be for the future. And employers have tended to assume that they could go out to the community college or to the universities and say, I want you to deliver, next month, X number of people fully formed with these skills. It takes time. It's not a matter of simply turning on a tap and having people flowing out. So we need to have much more collaboration, much better data in terms of projecting what the needs are going to be in the future, and in terms of aligning our resources to where they need to be so that we can close that gap between the skills available and the skills that are needed in the workforce.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially when we also look at it through the lens of just transition and changes that we as a society need to make over the next coming years within workplaces to address climate change issues and how we're moving away from certain jobs and creating new jobs. And so it is critical, and you're 100% right. We can't just turn on the tap and have new training programs ready to roll and have workers graduating from those programs. We need to actually take a deep dive, do a proper assessment, and make sure that we build around what those needs are.
What are some of the other ways in which we can collaborate with one another in terms of trying to, particularly for persons with disabilities, to look at allowing them to achieve their full potential and make the full contribution?
I think it's critical for us not to assume that we know the answers as employers and as unions, that we actually go and speak with the community, that we actually go and speak with disability rights groups to find out what their specific wants, desires, and needs are to incorporate that. Because it would be a mistake for us to just cobble together something based on our needs. We need to make sure that it's fulsome and that it's also something that folks want to actively participate in and they see themselves reflected in, and they should be really the guiding force within those conversations as well.
Yeah, which makes good sense to me as well. I see that we're fast running out of time here, and I think Alec is going to be getting out the hook and pulling us back shortly. But let me really underscore where I started, and that's that we're living in an incredibly different environment from the one that we knew even 5 years ago, and that it is both a matter of basic justice of how we in a democracy treat one another, to ensure that every one of our citizens has the opportunity to achieve his or her full potential. But beyond that, there's an economic imperative that if we're going to be successful in this country in providing growing living standards for Canadians and opportunity for Canadians, that we're going to have to look at doing things differently. And we're going to have to ensure that we both remove the barriers, but also that we reach out and tap into and enable and invite persons who in the past have been excluded or have fallen into a crack to achieve their full potential and to help us to build this country. And if anything comes out of the discussion that we have today, if we go forward determined to work together to try to achieve that, then I think that it'll be an important first step.
For sure. And I would just leave us with, the unions are doing the work of developing collective agreement language. Many unions are already doing a tremendous job on this particular issue. And the labor movement has developed a new resource. It's called Doing Things Differently, Disability Rights at Work Handbook. And folks can find that by checking out the website at canadianlabour.ca. It's canadianlabour.ca. It's a very comprehensive handbook that speaks to all of these issues and how we can work together with employers to move these issues forward.
Great. Thanks, Bea. And Alec, why don't I turn it back to you?
Thank you both. I believe I speak for everyone attending when I express great gratitude to both of you for making time to come today. I believe we're very fortunate in Canada to have business and labor leaders that can talk to each other, that can collaborate, that can problem solve. It doesn't take away from issues where there might be disagreements or even little struggles from time to time, but to have that basic vision in common of what we're trying to accomplish here, it's so important. And you should know that all among those attending are many, many people with lived experience who are really looking for this kind of collaboration to give them that opportunity to show you what they can do in the workplace and to have a career, to have advancement, to have the security that so many of us take for granted. So on behalf of everyone, many, many thanks. There've been a lot of questions raised. I'm harvesting all of them. What I'll be doing is transmitting through your staff all those questions so you can think about your responses and how to fit it all together, and then we'll circulate that to everyone who's attended the conference. And that'll give you a good chance to think through some of these issues. Some of the questions are pretty difficult, they're challenging, and they probably will require some new thinking. So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much, and we can release you to the rest of your busy day and probably your busy evenings as well, and wish you the very best of the season as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.
And I'll hand off now to Steve Mantis, who is going to carry us through the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Alec, and thanks again to Bea and Perrin for your engaging discussion today. We're needing to readjust our schedule a little bit today. We've got regrets from our next speaker, Nokomis Roberta. She's been called to other duties and is not able to join us today. So I want to invite Heather and Ingrid to come back on and offer some reflections on the 4 days of the conference and our focus on moving forward together to full inclusion. Over to you, Heather and Ingrid.
Thank you. Ingrid's going to begin.
Just need a moment, thanks. Well, everyone, it's been an amazing 4 days. That plenary that we just finished listening to was really great. In the 4 days of the conference, we have explored the characteristics of inclusion and belonging, what they entail, what they require, what's getting in the way, and what can be done, what strategies can be put in place. And I think it's given a lot of hope to our community. The terms inclusion and belonging have continued to elude many persons with disabilities in the fullness of their definitions, and therefore, have been rendered unreliable and effectively meaningless in far too many of the lived and living experiences of many of us in the disability community. And a lot of the conversation, and particularly the one that was just finished, really lends so much hope to what is going on to combat that, to change that, and what more can be done. Because we know that as long as members, of certain groups such as the deaf, hard of hearing community, those with intellectual disabilities, those who are neurodivergent, racialized, gender diverse, and many others that I haven't mentioned, but that continue to be disproportionately negatively impacted even within our community until those groups can fully realize inclusion and belonging and diversity and equity. Those terms can never be considered to be fully achieved. And I have been so incredibly grateful to have been immersed in community throughout this conference. And there are so many different aspects that I could comment on, but at this time, I'm really going to go for sentimentality over intellect. And I know what I might say following this might not resonate with everyone because we all have different, personalities and temperaments, but I'm going to appreciate your brief indulgence. Sayabano is a West African greeting, and if there's anybody on the call from South Africa and or from West Africa, forgive my mispronunciation because I'm only saying it from having read it. But Sayabano is a West African greeting, which translates to "I see you, I acknowledge you, and I respect you." And the return greeting, the response is Yebo, which means I see you seeing me. And I hope that when I say it to you in a moment, as a visually impaired person, that it will nonetheless resonate really deeply with you because it truly is coming from my heart. So here goes. Sawabano, I see you. Each and every one of you on this call. I see your desire, I see your hunger, I see your pain, but I also see your joy. I see your dedication and steadfastness, your possibility, your fullness. And most of all, I see your love. And I thank you for bringing all that you could, when you could, and how you could to these 4 days of the conference. And I also want to give you back the response, Yebo, I see you seeing me. Bye for now. That's it for me.
I've got goosebumps because I too work from that same place, Ingrid, that this has not just been a conference about learning from my intellect, but it has been, I have to say, a welcoming to community into these spaces we normally don't have a voice, and the real life inclusion of looking at how we can work together has been a very powerful feeling for me. So often we get siloed and we think, oh, no one will understand, because we don't take our disability off when we go home at night like a coat. It's with us 24/7, and along with people's attitudes and the environment that has never been inviting. So this 4 days has been very inviting, very caring, very thoughtful and intentional. And I was really pleased to hear how important it was to many, many speakers that the people at the table in these 4 days is also inclusive of the people that every piece of work you do will impact, and that is the rights holders, people with disabilities, cross disability, intersectionally with disability. And we also need to start really accepting that there are other ways of knowing. And I wanted to say, Newcomus Roberta started this conference with a Thanksgiving. She talked about traditional values and how ways of knowing from her culture were important. Now, as a fire starter and a fire keeper in my own culture, since time immemorial, cultures have been using fire as a way of gathering. Our fires have been burning very big, very bright. They've also been burning, sometimes smoldering, and at times going underground when you don't really know they're there. However, they're never extinguished. None of the fires that any of us have ever built in the work we're doing in this area have ever been extinguished. I'm excited that the work of this conference has added more fires, and you've also ensured there were more seats around those fires to have these conversations and to actually start putting them in action. One of the things at the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, we did a lot of work with community around legal issues, legal capacity, issues around going through to the Supreme Court, winning human rights that now many people are just trying to get actualized. So it's not that we don't have those fires. We have them, but sometimes they're forgotten. So it takes all of us to remind each other and the people that we work with that those exist. I also wanted to say that many Indigenous languages do not have the word disability. And as a result, the concept of exclusion is not there. If someone is not working or feeling good about what's going on for them, the community feels it's their responsibility that they have somehow not listened, not had observed, not have given that person the pathways to be successful. So it becomes a community responsibility. And I think these last 4 days, we've really seen that community come together from so many areas around employment and disability. And I'm really grateful for that because it's been a long journey for the people who have been doing this work, coming together over these years to really bring us to this place. And I guess in closing to you, I want to say that everyone who's been involved, take an ember with you. Take an ember of what you've learned, what you've acknowledged, and grow that within your own networks and the people you come in contact with. Grow that ember into another fire with more seats. And I think, although it's a tough slog sometimes, remember the fire is never extinguished. It may go underground, it may get very small, and it may feel very cold, but it doesn't take much to bring it back. And I thank you for bringing that sense of belonging, that sense of I am here, I am valued into this space. And for all of you, it means we are all valued. Thank you. And I turn it back over to Steve.
I need a little help to get my video working again. Thank you so much to Heather and Ingrid. I'm feeling all emotional here as well from your sharing that's just happened. My job today is really to say thank you to so many people. And we are all on a journey, like you've just said, Heather. I lost my left arm working construction in 1978. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I was able to describe myself as a person with a disability. I had those same attitudes reflected in our larger society that a disability was less than. It wasn't a term that I wanted to apply to myself. But with help and sharing with others, I realized that there was a place for me in the fight for our rights as people with disabilities, really as citizens of our country and of the world, really. And I've been involved in that journey, working to enact our rights that we have, both in law, both in Canada and internationally. And this journey really builds on the work of many others that have come before us. And I want to thank those folks who stepped out of the shadows and said, no, this is not the way we want to be treated. This is not what we see as being included in society. We stand on their shoulders. And I really want to thank our administrative staff who have worked diligently for the last 6 months to make sure that we had all the checks and balances and the technical considerations in place to make all this happen. And our two main folks I want to mention, and there's many, but I want to really acknowledge our team of S&S, Sabrina and Samira, who have been really the core of keeping us on track and bringing us to the successful outcome today. Sabrina works at the Institute for Work and Health, and Samira works with the Canadian Council of Rehabilitation and Work. And without these two organizations providing them and in paying their wages to help us, we wouldn't be where we are today, which really speaks to the importance of our allies. We as folks with disabilities, more or less, are pushed down to a lower economic rung in society. And we rely on our allies, our friends, our colleagues, our families to help us move that level up so that we do have some of the resources and abilities to pull off events like we have had over these last 4 days. I also want to thank one of our earlier admin staff, Kathy P. Kathy was with us for the first 4 years, and she was so instrumental in developing all the systems and the processes that we have built on over these last 5 years. Our first conference was in 2017 in person in Ottawa, where we had a little bit over 100 participants. We've grown now to having about 500 people registered for the event. And today we had over 200 joining us at any one time. I want to thank all of our presenters who shared their time, their experience, and their knowledge with us over these last 4 days. It's so refreshing to see so many people with so many different angles working towards those same goals of having an inclusive society that means all of us are included, regardless of the color of our skin, the way our bodies work, our minds work, all these different pieces, that we want a society that welcomes all of us. And thank you so much. And to all the participants, and Heather's words really about taking that ember from our common fire today and sharing it is, you are the leaders of our future. Our tent is growing bigger and bigger, and all of you are able to be, and you already are, leaders in your community to take the messages you heard over these 4 days, the ways of moving from accommodation to inclusion, where we design our society, where we design our workplaces to be open to all, whether it's our culture or our physical or mental or psychological or emotional makeup that somehow separates us at times from others in society. And a big part of that is creating more methods for all of us to participate in the decision-making processes that are so important both in our workplaces and our society in general. So to all of you future leaders, you present and future leaders, our challenge is that moving forward together to full inclusion in our society. And lastly, I want to thank the other members of our steering committee. You've been introduced to them and seen various sides of them over the last 4 days. We work regularly. I mean, none of us are employed in this initiative. We're all here because we're committed, and we come from a variety of different backgrounds, whether it's as academics and researchers, as service deliverers, people with disabilities, all working to ensure the rights of people with disabilities are upheld and are really valued throughout our society, and particularly in our workplaces. I feel like we are an example of how we can work together from these various perspectives and bring our common goals together in a way that welcomes each other's opinions and encourages us to take leadership and move forward in a way that does reflect a full inclusive society. So once again, thank you everyone for your time, your commitment to these issues, and we hope that we see you all again next year. And I'm really looking forward to if we can see you in person, because that's where some of our connections get even stronger. And thank you so much. All of the sessions will be available afterwards at the conference website. We weren't able to watch everything, but they will be there where you can watch it in the comfort of your workplace or home. And I encourage you to do that. Please keep in touch with us here at the Disability and Work Canada. And I wish all of you success and inclusion today, tomorrow, and throughout our collective future. Take care. Bye-bye.